up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Oner podcast, the podcast where we break down and give our critiques of films all in one take. I'm Austin Archer, and with me, as always, is my childhood next-door neighbor and lifelong BFF,
Cramer, England.
Oh boy, a couple of Utah Mormon boys getting into a movie that features a couple of Utah Mormon gals.
Yep.
We made it. We made it to the mainstream.
We did. We made in some form. Well, you know, South Park, if you consider South Park the mainstream, and the Book of Mormon musical, this is the mainstream. It's been there for a while.
Yeah, we'd be lying if we said that this is the first time that Mormonism has entered the mainstream consciousness. In fact, I'd say for most of the 21st century, there has been a heightened awareness of the LDS Church and its members in pop culture, you know, with things I like when South Park did that episode all about Mormons.
Yes,
that was kind of one of the first times that I think a lot of people had been exposed to, like, the story of Joseph Smith and stuff like that. And then, of course, the massive success of their musical, and you know, but I with all of the reality TV shows that are based in Utah, and like it just seems like there's more and more and more national and international attention on this culture.
Yes.
And here we are, A24, Hugh Grant.
Yeah,
they're
bringing it up. Yeah, it's there is a lot more. It's those reality TV. I mean, specifically the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives.
Oh boy, I loved it. I watched every episode.
Did you really? Okay.
I watched every episode.
My wife had watched some of it, and just a little bit I'm watching. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. But there is always, you know, this is the thing about media in general for any religion ever. Take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to media. Go do your own research if you want to find out something. Like, don't just take a movie's word for it, or don't just take, like, you know, the funny thing is South Park is probably the most accurate in some ways. They do they grew up around it. Trey Parker, Matt Stone grew up around it, and they kind of know about it. They did, from what I've seen, they did their research, and they're pretty accurate. And they make fun of all religions the same. So I'm like, okay, that's great. You know, you get it right. That's fine if you don't agree with it. But sometimes, you know, just take everything with a grain of salt, do your own research, and find out for yourself if you really want to. And that's what I have to do. I always have to do that whenever I see a movie about another religion. I'm like, okay, I you know, so when the Da Vinci Code came out, like with Opus Dei, and I haven't done research on Opus Dei or anything, but, you know, interviews with people saying, oh, that's not really what it's like. Like, I can go do my research and find out. I'm not going to take what Paul Bettany did to himself as what the religion actually does. So anyway, that's my spiel.
Fair enough. So, I mean, just a little bit of background here. So we are talking about the new A24 horror, psychological thriller, whatever you want to call it, film Heretic. That is the basic plot of this movie is two Mormon missionaries sort of get ensnared into a game of cat and mouse by an atheistic man intent on challenging their faith with a series of escalating kind of psychological puzzles that they need to solve. And played brilliantly by Hugh Grant. It's a really fantastic role from him.
Yes.
But the thing that I keep seeing online is, like, there are a lot of people in the LDS community, a lot of LDS members, former missionaries, things like that, giving their commentary on this. I saw this and I went, this is really interesting, because you and I were raised in the LDS faith.
Yes.
In Utah, next door neighbor, same ward, same everything.
Yeah.
But we have split ways in our adult life, in our faith. And so I've identified for the last, 17 years or so as an atheist. Even I'm in recovery, and I do 12-step work and stuff like that. And I use the word God, and I have my own conception of what that means, but I have my own relationship with prayer and what that means to me and all that stuff. But I thought this would be really interesting, because we can have this kind of dual perspective of, like, we've got you, who is an active member of the LDS Church. We've got me, a former member, who is more probably identified with the arguments and the perspective of the Hugh Grant character. And we can each sort of give our feedback on how we think they did representing our viewpoint in this film, you know? Yeah. So
yeah, it's going to be I think it's going to be a great conversation, especially since we can have a civil conversation about things we disagree about. So hopefully
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
I might wind up putting you in like a dungeon and
yeah, making me eat blueberry wolfsbane pie or whatever it is.
Absolutely. You can't trust me. I don't like you can't trust us godless people, you know.
Atheists, they're the worst.
Yeah. So that okay, so let's start with you. First of all, spoiler alert with all of our episodes.
Yeah, we're gonna spoil this movie.
We're going to spoil this movie. You should go see it if you haven't. I think it's worth seeing. I think it's a solid thriller from I'll say this on the outset. I think this movie is very well constructed. I think this movie is well acted. I like a lot of aspects of the script, particularly just in its construction. I think that technically it is constructed well. The cinematography is excellent. Hugh Grant is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I think it's a worthwhile ride. But I want to get into what did you, on the outset, before we start getting into finer plot details, pardon me, what did you think worked or felt accurate as far as an LDS person and the representation you were seeing, and what didn't work?
Yeah, it's overall, this movie I felt like was pretty accurate comparatively. Like they did a lot of things that were they kind of generally in the mainstream media, they'll say things that aren't accurate. And a lot of times in this one, they said things that were accurate. Definitely had some things that were not accurate in the movie. The biggest one being, the biggest one that comes to my mind is reincarnation. You know, the sister missionary says, well, when I die, I'm going to come back as a butterfly. And I mean, it's a weird thing. Like, it doesn't offend me. It doesn't make me mad. But it's just inaccurate because we don't believe in reincarnation as far as reincarnation coming back as something else. And it was an easy fix. All she had to do is, well, if we believed in reincarnation, I would want to come back as a butterfly.
Yeah.
You know, like, but other than that, there were a few little things. And this was the biggest thing too. The sister missionary with I don't know what you call it in their arm, the birth control
implant.
Contraceptive. Yes. Whatever the implant is. Hugh Grant asks her, well, how would your community feel if they knew about this? And she's like, well, she'd be shunned and made to feel shame for for that or whatever. And, you know, in my mind, I think in my case, that's not true. I know a lot of women, who have used birth control for various reasons. I don't see any problem with it. That's not anything that I feel like anyone would be shunned for. Now, when it comes down to the sister missionary having it, this kind of gets into an overall problem that I had with the movie, which is the characters were inconsistent in my mind. There's a lot of inconsistencies with the characters, who they were. And this might just be from my perspective as a member of the church. But you start out with two sister missionaries, and one seems to be very sheltered and naive. The other one seems to be very sure of herself, but maybe possibly doubting. And then just as the movie goes on, you get into really kind of differences in how those characters would actually act. And we'll get into that more. But the inconsistencies were kind of a problem for me. That's more of a movie thing than a religious thing. As far as the religion, the contraceptive, the reincarnation, and then the opening conversation were the biggest things that I had problems with. The opening conversation was the worst because no missionaries would ever have that conversation like they did. Like, it was I'm not offended by the conversation. It just completely rang untrue as anyone would actually have that conversation as missionaries.
It's a really interesting choice to make that the first conversation that they have in the movie, because every every reaction that I've seen from active LDS people is they went, no. Like, it's like they see the girls, they see how they're dressed, and they go, yeah, that looks like sister missionaries. Like, the way that they're talking to people on the street all looks generally accurate. So everyone's going, okay, yeah, settling in. But immediately, and I wonder if the screenwriters did it on purpose because it so immediately makes people go, nope. But I don't know what the goal would be, because all I'm seeing is that all of the curious LDS people who are going to see the film are immediately kind of switched off by that and sort of unplugged by that. Now, my thing being a former LDS person is I've seen all these reactions of people saying they would never have that conversation. They would never in a million years. And I was like, I mean, maybe not on your mission, but like you can't imagine a scenario in which two young people would be like, hey, one time I saw a video online and it was a pornographic video, and having the other one being like, you watch porn, and being like, no, I don't know. Like, because I was like, it wasn't like they were just going like, oh man, I think porn's great, don't you? It was like they were having a conversation the way that two people who want to let each other know that they don't normally do that would have that conversation. And I think that the screenplay is trying to tell us something about these characters, trying to say this character is sort of almost testing her younger companion to be like, hey, if we talk about this, how do you respond? And then when she responds kind of like, I don't feel comfortable with this conversation, she's like, oh yeah, don't worry, that's not what I'm saying. And is like, I was just saying that when, I think that there's a lot of things in the screenplay that are trying to tell us like there's more to these girls than meets the eye. There's more going on in their lives than, there's more dimensions there than just I'm a member of this church and this is what I believe and this is what I do. Because and I think that in reality there are a lot of LDS people who have more dimension to them where they're like, oh yeah. It's like, this is my faith, but also I had a period of my life where I was smoking weed a lot, or and now I no longer am. But that's or like people who are like, I had a big problem or a big sin in the church is like premarital sex, sex outside of wedlock. And there are missionaries who have had sex. There are people who, like do that. Then they work with their bishop to. So when I see the reaction to that and people go, that would never happen. I'm like, well, but wouldn't it though? Like, I'm not saying all the time. I'm not saying it's a normal, regular conversation, but I'm saying I don't know, but
I think it's that the things that they talk about and the way that they talk about them would not really, it wouldn't really, I don't feel the conversation would go that way. Yeah. And I just think, also how nonchalant they were about it. I mean, I think it was set up at the very beginning to kind of make people uncomfortable. And that uncomfortableness goes throughout the whole movie. Yeah. It plays it to its effect, but it also just is kind of like, okay, this is a strange conversation that wouldn't really happen that way. And this goes into the inconsistency of the character, because Sister Paxton, who is the blonde-haired one, right? She was the blonde-haired one. Yeah. She seemed to be very sheltered just by the fact that she wouldn't even say pornography, right? Or porn or whatever. She just would say like, pornography. Like, she was really weird about it, right? Yep. And then Sister Barnes talking about, everything that she talked about also is just kind of like, well, why? They're both very nonchalantly talking about it. Yeah. And I don't feel like that conversation would happen in that way and with that much detail. Yeah. And also it was a very weird conversation to start with. And then, going back to Sister Paxton, she seems to be very sheltered. But somebody who's sheltered, right? Who like Molly Mormon, whatever. They generally wouldn't talk about that just because that's not something that they would talk about. They would think it was evil and never talk about it. So, but the fact that she's saying it so naively, I don't know. It was just very strange. The whole conversation is very strange. Very strange way to start the movie.
Well, so this is where I think our differing perspectives, because me as from a secular position of like, I haven't been active in this church for almost 20 years. And what I see as a secular person watching that conversation is I do see two young women who are very uncomfortable with the subject matter of but they're trying to have a conversation about something that they know in their culture is not something people normally talk about. And they're trying to, be like they're talking about like condoms, and it's like, well, my sister who's married told me that, and they're, in a way that's like I agree. It's a weird way it's a weird first conversation to start out with. But it feels to me in that way, like the filmmakers are doing that intentionally. They're trying to show us, like, the information that I'm getting is these two highly religious women from this very particular idiosyncratic culture are trying to have a conversation about sexuality, but like doing it in this way where they don't quite know what the boundaries are or the limits of like what they can say, and trying to, like you said, like she struggles with the, like, I don't know how to say this. Like, she's like, well, they were like sexing each other, like they, like, which I agree. It's a little, but I don't, to me, it's not just that they're like, this is a conversation we have every day, and this is a very normal conversation for two Mormon missionaries to be having. That's not the vibe I got. I got the vibe that the filmmakers were trying to say, this is an abnormal conversation that they're navigating awkwardly.
Well, and I mean, I think that's what they're getting, but again, just the way that they talk about it and the extent at which they talk about it. It's not that missionaries can't have a conversation about pornography or sexual intimacy or anything like that, but the way that they do it rings very untrue as two sister missionaries speaking like that. So it's the subject is one thing, the extent is another, and the extent and the whole conversation, it just definitely rang untrue. So, and it just also didn't seem to come back to the movie in any way.
Sure.
So it was like, what's the point of this conversation? And it could make you uncomfortable, but also like, well, where does it come back? What's the, it just kind of seemed to be very strange way to start the movie, but whatever. That's
I see that. Because everyone talked about that opening conversation. And then I was like, like I definitely clocked that in the theater. And I definitely immediately thought, this is going to be something that's going to rub a lot of LDS people the wrong way immediately. But I was like, I was sitting there going, I know that me and I've talked about this kind of stuff with my LDS friends. So like, I don't,
well, and when you're on a mission, when you're on a mission, it is definitely different, right? You are held to a different standard when you're on your mission. You are studying the scriptures every day. You're teaching it all day. You're trying to understand more about your own religion and other people's religion. At least that's how my mission was. And so just those conversations don't come up that often. And even conversations that I would have before my mission, I wouldn't have had them on my mission, right? Kind of, you're trying, I mean, overall, I was trying to be a better person, or trying to be, and I still try to, it's not like, but it just kind of, it is a different standard that you hold yourself to. So,
well, and with so the things that you pointed out are that opening conversation, reincarnation, and the contraceptive and the cultural reaction to a contraceptive being used in the implant. And I clock all of those as well. Totally. And I also wonder if all of those are being done intentionally because I think that there's maybe a difference between, is this film trying to do its best, most accurate representation of the prototypical LDS mission experience, or is it trying to show us two characters who have a lot of prototypical qualities, but are aberrations of the norm in their own ways? That one of them has ideas about reincarnation that maybe she just came up with on her own, that are sort of her own little thing, and one of them maybe is using birth control, maybe just as some sort of sometimes it's used for different things like endometriosis or or maybe she has a history that she is not, and there's, you can bring that question in there.
I thought that exact same thing. Yes.
Yeah. And so I thought,
the movie is definitely not trying to bring people to the church. And I don't say that in a negative way. They're using the church as a way into the story. Because how many religions go out and knock on people's doors and preach besides the LDS faith and Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah.
There are not many. So they're kind of representing religion as a whole, also bringing the uniqueness of our religion into the story with Hugh Grant. So they're not really trying to do right by the church. Not that they're trying to make it bad, but they're more worried about the story that they're telling rather than being accurate to what the church's beliefs are, even though they actually were pretty accurate.
Yeah, they're doing a pretty good job. But the movie's not a commercial for the LDS Church.
No, it's not. It's not a recruiting tool that they will be using.
Yeah, it's a good story device for how do you get two young, vulnerable women in the home of a scary man. And this is a great device for how this happens.
And this is something that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's where, that is the official name of our church. People call us Mormons, we LDS, right? Latter-day Saint, all that. The church is a stand-in for all religions, at least in my opinion. So I see this almost as kind of like Super Size Me. So, Super Size Me, he did McDonald's, but McDonald's is supposed to represent all fast food.
Right.
This is not a critique of solely the LDS church. It is a critique of religion as a whole. And it's not, I
wouldn't even, Hugh Grant's character, his beef is not with Mormonism or the LDS church. His beef is with religion. And so now that brings me to, as an atheist, what I saw, because the other thing being represented here is sort of atheism and secularism.
Yes.
And it was so interesting seeing all of these LDS responses and the ways that I could see that people were kind of having the same response you have, where they're like, in general, for the most part, I don't find this to be like a terribly offensive representation or anything like that. And I was like, because I kind of expected going into this film, honestly, I expected it to hit a little harder and to get, and at the end of the film, I was like, well, I think that the end result of this movie is those girls are protagonists, are good guys.
Yeah.
And the villain of the film is the atheist, like unquestionably, like he's just straight up evil. And so I was like, I get it. I get that a movie needs a thriller.
Right.
We needs one of these characters to be the villain. And I also know that it's always really compelling to have a villain who has interesting or compelling arguments. We like that, a villain who you can sort of side with him. But at the end of the day, I will say, from my perspective, the arguments that Hugh Grant sort of goes through throughout the first couple acts of the film, for the most part, to me, I was like, I've heard these arguments before, and I've used these arguments or versions of these arguments before.
Right.
It was a little bit like atheism for beginners, like kind of like beginner crash course on YouTube. Like you can find clips of Richard Dawkins or Stephen Hitchens saying these things, or Ricky Gervais, or like I was like, I've heard all of these different, and I was sort of like, I kind of wish that the screenplay had something maybe a little deeper on offer, and it felt like it was going there. It felt like he was like, as we go deeper, there's going to be deeper truths unveiled. Yes. And I will admit that the third act reveal to me of like what the one true religion is, for me, I was like, it was a little like, okay, it was like want, and it was kind of like, that's what you've sort of been saying all along. And I was sort of hoping for something maybe a little more revelatory that would for me would go like, oh, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And at the end of the day, he's just sort of like a pretty standard, like internet comment atheist who upholds this this kind of fallacious idea that you can't have morals without faith.
Yeah.
And like that, like, of course he's evil because there's nothing tethering him to morality.
Yeah.
So of course, like in the absence of some kind of supernatural dictator of morality, of course he becomes homicidal and completely valueless. And I was like, I get it. It's a thriller. It's a horror movie, and we want our scares and stuff like that. And obviously from the jump, everything that this man is doing is like not okay. Like locking two young women in his house and deceiving them and lying to them and pulling them into this like kind of like mentally abusive cat and mouse game. None of it's okay.
Yeah.
But I thought that maybe there was a more interesting way to go deeper into the story where there's a little bit more gray area between our two opposing viewpoints. And I felt like at the end of the movie, my people were more poorly represented than the LDS people were. I was like, well, at the end of the movie, we're the bad guys, and the people of faith are like are being picked on by the evil atheists, you know? And so I was like, I don't know. Yeah. So
that's so interesting to hear. That's very interesting to hear from your perspective, for sure, because I can totally see that. And I agree. I think I watched a review by Jeremy Johns, and he said pretty much the same thing. Like, this whole movie is basically the guy on Facebook who likes to comment about how religions are all false, and he just gives you the same things that you've all heard. So everybody put him on mute. So he just decided to kidnap people and force them to hear his comments on Facebook, which I thought was really funny, because it is a pretty surface level arguments that he uses. Those are all arguments that I heard on my mission, and everybody I've talked to, they're all arguments that everybody has heard. Right? They're nothing too out of the ordinary. And I agree too. I wish that he would have done something a little different, a little bit more, I don't know, like you're saying, kind of like revelatory, because it is pretty standard. It didn't shake my faith at all. I'm sure it could shake somebody's faith, but it didn't shake mine. I've heard it all before. And this is the funniest thing, though, is that every time obviously you're my friend, and I have other atheist friends. And even when I was on my mission, I met a few atheists. They were like the nicest people to us, which was so funny, because the worst people were usually members of other religions, right? And they were very combative, and they weren't very, like accepting, or what, they just wanted to argue. And the atheists would always be very open and listen to what we had to say, and we would talk back and forth, have a great conversation. Not to say that I didn't have great conversations with other religions. I did as well, but my view of atheists has always been pretty positive, because I can always talk to them, and they are very respectful of what I believe, and they're very sure in their ways, just as I'm sure in my ways. So
I think the reason for that is that most atheists were raised as theists, and have a lot of people in their family and close friends who are believers, and so they have a lot of like empathy and compassion for that experience because they lived it. And so I don't know. There's an argument that I hear from time to time on the internet as an atheist person, and I sometimes co-host this skeptic call-in show called The Line here on YouTube, that where believers call in and try to give us like stump us with and it's just a show that we do. But often one of the things that I hear regularly is people will call in and say like, well, how do you determine what's good and bad? Like, how do you do good? Like, why do you behave well if there's no God? And always the answer to that is like, Ricky Gervais has a great answer to it, where he's like, I rape and murder as much as I want to, which is none at all, which is, I don't want to. And and there's so many reasons to be a good person if you live in society. Like, there's just so many benefits to trying to be service oriented and kind and generous and charitable, that go beyond like, well, I'm trying to make sure I go to heaven, and I think that's one thing that I was disappointed in this film, is that it sort of reinforces that idea that like, without the basis of some sort of organized faith structure, There is nothing to tether you to any kind of cosmic morality. You will just become an evil person who keeps people as prisoners in your basement. And, you know, like, and like sort of like this cold, amoral, purely logical, completely devoid of emotion or compassion, the nature of science, that he's just this scientific man who just wants to study things and do experiments, but he doesn't care about how he affects people. And I don't know. I think that this is an interesting movie because my subjective score is going to be different from all of my other scores, because I don't think it was made for me. And I think it's similar to the way that like Barbie, a lot of people criticize Barbie because they said this is sort of feminism 101. This is sort of feminism for dummies. And it's like very entry level feminism. And so feminists wanted something a little more, like seasoned feminists wanted something a little more in-depth, a little more in-depth probing into the patriarchy and into gender dynamics. And I think it's going to be the same for LDS people and atheists alike, people who are very certain of their beliefs, that they're going to watch this film and sort of crave a little bit of a deeper probe into these ideas. But maybe the target audience is for people who are sort of coming at this with kind of a blank slate of like, I'm open to, maybe the agnostic viewer who's just like, I'm open to all possibilities and all potential arguments. Maybe that's the target viewer for this film.
It's a really good point too, because it's different perspective on different sides of the spectrum. You see it differently, which I really love that take. I really like that you said that, because I had never thought of that, obviously, because I'm coming from the other side. So and I, in all honesty, I thought it actually would have been better if it was called Zealot, and he was an extremely religious person who put them through oh god, what is it, the seven levels of hell, Dante's Inferno,
some kind of faith test,
and made them do these things that would test their faith on morality and things that, involving human lives, right? That would, I thought that would be the more fun. And that's kind of what I was expecting from the trailers. I thought it was going to be a maze that would have different rooms that they would have to test their faith in and all that. Because that's kind of what why does he have a model of a room that just two stairs that just go down to one room?
It's kind of just like, 3 rooms, right?
Yeah. Like why do you make a model of that?
It's like 3.5. It's like 3.5 rooms. It's like the
like
the
a
main
hall
room
that has like a few rooms in it while you go through the pentagrams in it.
There's like the family room, the study, the dungeon, and the super dungeon. And like that's and those are like your rooms. So let's get into some. Let's get into some of the plot details. We've already talked about a little bit. Like it's this. These Mormon missionaries are.
One thing I wanted. So they have the conversation at the beginning, and then they go out and they see these girls crossing the street, and they're doing some sort of TikTok or Instagram thing, And Sister Paxton is like, "Oh, I can already tell that I love these girls," which again, I could not tell if she was supposed to be like of the world or if she was supposed to be sheltered. Because the conversation at the beginning made it seem like she was sheltered, but then this one seems like that's what she wants to do. But then, they come over and they want to take a picture and they talk about magic underwear, right?
I thought this to me was one of those like movie moments where someone gets bullied in a way that I'm like, for real? Like in real life, are people pantsing women? Like are women pantsing other women? And like, I'm like, I don't know if and again, it's this thing of like the secular people are so evil. And I'm just like, really? Like, wouldn't I think it could be just as effective if she said something like just made a comment about the magic underwear, but I'm like, you're going to like fully assault this woman and like pants her in public. Like, I don't know.
And that's interesting. I she did that. And I was not offended by it because of what happened after. Because after then Sister Paxton is crying, and I appreciated that they took that seriously, because I was not offended by what they showed. I appreciated that it affected her deeply, right? Because that would be a very offensive thing to do for someone. And so speaking of any other religion, right? If you took off like the hijab of someone someone who wears a hijab, that would be extremely offensive. They have made a commitment not to, show their hair, any religion you can apply it to. So I appreciated that they took that seriously.
Yeah.
Because I would be very offended if someone did that to anybody, right?
Yeah.
Because we wear undergarments, right?
Yeah.
That we have made they remind us of the promises we've made in the temple. So I appreciated that. Like, I see what you're saying. There probably nobody would do that, but I did. A lot of people make jokes about garments.
It's a good way to let the audience know, like, hey, this is something that that these people take very seriously. It would be similar to a scene where someone snatches a hijab off of someone's head. It would be, like a very So
it would be a very traumatic, emotional thing. So I appreciated that, because a lot of times you just make jokes about it without having any sort of recourse. So anyway, that was the thing that I appreciated. Like, okay, thank you for taking those seriously, because that is something that is very sacred to me. So I appreciated that. I could see what you're saying though. Like, that probably wouldn't happen, but that was good. But that's pretty much, once they do that, they get to Hugh Grant's house and he starts, it's really raining outside. And then he asked them to come in, which this was the other thing. They're like, oh, do you have a female roommate? It's like, well, why don't you just say, like, do you have a wife, a spouse, or another female in the home? Like, that's what I would say. I would. They were a little they were a little too rote in their presentation to people. But that missionaries before used to follow a script. Now it's supposed to be just have a conversation with somebody and know what you're supposed to say. So that was a little funny, but not anything big. And some missionaries are like that. So.
Yeah, they go inside. He tells them that his wife's inside, which, I've heard some people say, like, they wouldn't go inside without seeing the wife. But I'm like, I think that the movie's aware of that. And it's saying, like, because they're getting dumped rain on them, they just make the ill-fated decision to trust this man and trust that his
bought
wife,
it. I bought it.
Yeah. That it's like, surely the wife will come out and listen, like, I've talked to so many people who have been on missions who broke rules all the time. And
you would. And
I've
leave the door open and we'll just talk right here. Definitely. So I was not bothered by that, because they could if they really want to teach this guy, and it sounds like he contacted
and he
them,
seems and also there's something here that I didn't see a lot of people commenting on when they would talk about these inconsistencies, which is he seems really excited and eager to talk to them.
He does.
And for missionaries, that's always like a really hard thing to pass up, is anybody that seems interested in talking to you. When you just get nothing but no, hell no, please no, no thank you, no, go away,
get off my
all
property.
day, get off my property all day long. The moment that there's somebody who's nice, who's like, no, I would love to talk with you. Is it okay if you come inside so we can chat? That's a hard thing to pass up, even if technically you need to see his wife before you step inside. If he says, my wife's making pie and you're being dumped rain on, and
I bought it.
Yeah.
And this was interesting though. I actually kind of like this part. He brings him in and he's like, he closes the door and he's like, well, the walls are lined with metal. Like, are you guys okay with that? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. But he says it so nonchalantly, as if it's a normal thing. And they just kind of like almost didn't even register what he said. And I was like, did he just say that?
Yeah.
Like, who would have metal in their walls?
Yeah.
Like, why would they do that? But for some reason, I know a lot of people don't like that, but I actually was like, that's kind of crazy that they're just trying to be so nice that they almost didn't even know what he said. And
I like all of the different ways that he tries to. But again, this is things where the screenplay like frustrates me, because again, he's trying to give them opportunities to consent to what's happening by sort of, but then he's also doing things to be intentionally deceptive, to be like, I'm obviously lying to you about my wife, but then he brings the candle out, and he doesn't need to do this. He does it so that they will see that there is no blueberry pie being baked and that it is just a scented candle. But he wants them to see that so that they know they're being lied to. So he wants them to be aware that they are part of
a ruse,
a deception. And then he wants them to have to move forward with that knowledge. And I just think that there's a lot of interesting philosophical things going on that could have been probed into more.
Yeah.
And the movie does, for the most part, like like we said, there's three main rooms that these long conversations take place in. The first one is just in this family room, and they have a nice long conversation about the Book of Mormon and about the, Mormonism. And he's got this kind of like old looking edition of the Book of Mormon. It's all marked up and it looks like he's really done his research and he's really,
the funny thing is if I would have seen that, I'd be like, oh, this guy's anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
Because anytime I would talk to somebody who was anti-Mormon, they would have Book of Mormons that were like totally marked up with things that they felt were inaccurate. And so I would have been like, oh, we better leave. Like, we better get out of here. This guy, because she's like, oh my goodness, Mr. Reed, you've read the Book of Mormon. I was like, no, that's a sign. That's a red flag. It wasn't a big deal. I just, in my own mind, I thought I've seen people that did that and they were very anti-Mormon. So
I talk to missionaries from time to time when I see them, if I see them, where I live because I like, when I used to live in New York, I'd see missionaries on the subway and I'd always come up and say hi to them. And I like chatting with them because we're usually from the same place. And so I'll ask them where they're from. And almost always, at least one of them is from Utah.
Yeah.
And, but like regularly, like we'll chat and then they'll go like, what ward are you in? We should come over for dinner. I'll go, oh, I'm not in a ward. I don't go to church. And then they'll go, oh, well, we should get your details and we should come over. And I'll go, oh, I was raised LES. And once they know that there's nothing I'm going to get out of having a discussion, they go like, oh, okay. It's like they understand, like, oh, so you just came over to say hi just to be nice. And I'm like, yeah.
But I appreciate that. I would have I had those conversations too. And it's like, well, thank you for being nice to me and not like coming and berating me with something like that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think we need to get into too many of the details of I think he uses a lot of analogies. There's one analogy in this first scene where he kind of leads the girls down this pathway to how do you know that the Book of Mormon is true? And it winds up with Sister Barnes saying, or Sister Paxton, I can't remember, saying, because we feel it. And he goes, bingo, that's it.
Yeah.
And then he goes into this analogy about fast food, which I was like, again, this is a fine analogy of being like, what's the best fast food restaurant? How do you know? And the idea is just like, I don't know. I just have a subjective opinion about this fast food restaurant being better than the other one. And I think that there's a better way to explore this idea of like this faith confirmation of I know it because I feel it is something that is experienced by people in all different faiths. If you talk to a devout Hasidic Jewish person and you say, why do you believe that you should live your life so orthodox the way that you do? It's like, because I feel I have a personal connection with God and that this is what I'm called to do. I used to always say, like, if you think you've got a stronger testimony than somebody who's willing to strap a suicide bomb to their vest and blow themselves up in the middle of a town square for their faith, that person's got a testimony of what they're doing. They believe, and so I kind of thought that the fast food, maybe it's that he's trying to deal with examples that are safe and approachable and don't feel argumentative or rude or belittling. Just feel like he's sort of dealing with them like a teacher, and he's trying to lead them to their own conclusions with, I really do like the playfulness that Hugh Grant brings to these conversations and the way that he keeps everything light and he doesn't.
Well, and he is very respectful at the beginning, right? He's always like, well, it's okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Like, and he's the fact that it's Hugh Grant makes it even better just because he's always playing very polite characters or very likable characters. So automatically you have this history with Hugh Grant and his acting career. And he plays it really, really well. And when he does switch, it actually works really well. But I agree. Like all the way up until the next room, like all the way through the next room, he was amazing. And I loved to watch him. I mean, I love to watch him the whole movie. I do think just his character itself became something I didn't really like, but he played it so well the entire movie. And he was very like, oh yeah, I can have a conversation with this guy. So he played it so well, and it really carried the movie really well. Kept me engaged the whole time.
Yeah, he leaves the room at one point. They realize that they see the scented candle, and they realize that they've been lied to, that he probably doesn't have a wife back there baking a pie, and they also realize that they're locked in this family room, and and they realize their cell phones don't work and they can't get out, and so they have no choice but to go and find him down this dark hallway and ask him to unlock the door for them and let them out. And this is when the movie starts stepping up its game as a thriller and as a horror movie, and you start feeling the intensity of the stakes of the situation. And they basically go upstairs and they find this kind of like weirdly constructed room that it's sort of like a mix between something that looks like a chapel and a study.
Yeah,
like it's like a mix between like a library and an office and a chapel, and it's got these two doors that are very kind of precariously placed on one wall, and they do kind of their second round of questioning. And at this point, the cat's kind of out of the bag in some ways. Everybody in the room is now aware that like he lied about having a wife, but he keeps saying, you're free to leave whenever you want, and you can leave through these doors. Either one of these doors will take you outside, and you're free to leave whenever you want. And again, I almost feel like the screenplay would have been interesting if he hadn't. There's so many lies that he tells that I'm like, is there a way to make that not a lie, that when by the time we get to the third act we find out that he really was giving them the option to
I wondered if, because he said the door will open in the morning, I wondered like, well, why don't you just wait till the morning? Like I know I know that they wouldn't do that, but like if you would have just waited till the morning, would they have opened? I mean, he could open them himself. I don't think that would have happened, but I agree. It's like you can leave whenever you want, you just have to leave through that door. It was
and also from the trailer, we see this in the trailer, that he writes belief on one door and disbelief on the other door. Yeah. And he gives them the option of, based on how you truly feel, which door do you want to pick? Now, in the film, they both wind up picking. There is a moment of where, Sister Paxton thinks that it's a strategy that she can say, oh, sir, you're so smart. You did a really good job convincing us that we're stupid to have faith, and we're going to leave through the disbelief door because that's what you want us to do.
Yeah.
But Sister Barnes is like, no, I'm going to stick to my faith, and I don't care about your, bad YouTube atheism. And you're kind of easy, you're kind of like surface level rhetoric that is easy to pick apart. I'm going to stick with my faith and go through the belief door. They both wind up going through the belief door. But what we find out is that both doors go to the same spot. And I was just kind of curious, like, what would have happened? What's his plan if they go through the disbelief door? Is there a different scenario that plays out? Because we don't really ever get to find out what the point of that.
Yeah, and that really got into the problems that I had with the movie, which is like, what is your plan?
Yeah.
Like, what it relies on very strange things that don't seem to line up. So I agree. Like, why do you have two doors if they end up in the same room, which is apparently, whether you believe or you disbelieve, you end up at the same conclusion, which is they're both false. Like it's not, it feels very thin to me that like, well, then why don't you just, I mean, my belief is that whether they went through belief or disbelief, it would have ended up the same, because his ultimate goal is to make them his slaves, really. So
right, but it also, like, you asked a good question. What is your goal? Because it seems like his goal is either to convince you to be one of my slaves in a cage in my basement, or to kill you. And it's like, well, then why go through the whole process of leading me through this whole thing? And I guess he's just a maniac who believes he's created his own religion, which is like, it's the purest form of, and I get this. He does this whole analogy in the study / chapel, using board games and using songs, showing that the idea of iterations, that different religions are just a new iteration on an old story. And again, this is all very entry level atheism of like,
which I thought was actually pretty good. I liked the Monopoly analogy. I thought that was pretty creative. I thought it was pretty good. Anyway,
I like it. I like the way that it's presented in the movie. I like. I think that it's it's a well-written scene, a well-performed scene. I like
Yes.
the use of the song. I think that that's all fun. And I agree, like, with the concept of iterations. And I did start to feel, oh, okay, so what he has done is he's created a new iteration of this same thing. And his home is his church, is his sanctuary, is the temple of his new religion that he's created. And I don't necessarily hate the eventual conclusion that what he believes he's done is distilled all of the dogma and stories out of all of these different iterations and boiled it down to its essence, which is just simply the principle of control, which is just, at the end of the day, you just want someone else to be in control of your decisions in your life, and I will be that person. I will just be in control. And he's leading them down this path to show them that he already does control them, that he told them from the beginning, there's metal in these walls and the door will not open and the door is locked. And you kept moving through you just kept doing what I asked you to do. And I get all that, but I agree with you that from the trailer, what I expected, especially with the setup of the two doors, is that they would lead to different places, and that each one because there's two women and two doors, that we would get to see two different experiences of moving through this kind of maze. One of them would pick the belief door, one of them would pick the disbelief door, and they would be different experiences that would say different things about what each one of those doors represents. And I don't know.
I think that would have been the more interesting movie. Yeah. In my opinion, not that this was horrible, but I feel like I want to see that movie. Yeah. I don't necessarily want to see where this one went, because I think this whole movie seemed to be set up to subvert everybody's expectations, right? Yeah. They cast Hugh Grant, who is generally a rom-com actor, and he becomes a villain. And he has two doors. You think it's going to go to a maze, but it doesn't. It just goes to one room. And then there's just a lot of things that they're subverting expectations. But it's like, listen, guys, this is directed by Beck and Woods. I'm sorry, I forgot their first names, but it's like, I think you guys are trying a little too hard. Like, sometimes I think subverting expectations is good, but when that's all you do, it becomes kind of like just boiled down to not very interesting. It could have been really interesting in the way that we just talked about, where two different doors lead to two different ways, and could have been that's the movie that I want to see. That's the movie that I think would have ultimately been more interesting. Yeah, I'm just sort of like, what's the point of writing those things on what's the point of even having two doors? Like, I just am like, why are if it's all just gonna go to the next room, why even have two doors? And I get the point being like, doesn't matter what you choose at all, you're under my control, that you're all being led to the same truth. And I'm like, yeah, but shouldn't you, as a person who believes you found this ultimate truth, believe that there is a difference between belief and disbelief? Yeah. That there is some material difference between those two concepts? Yeah. Anyway, they wind up going down the belief door into the dungeon. Yeah. And this woman shows up who is very scary, very terrifying. Yeah. This is probably the scariest part of the movie. Oh, for sure. And Hugh Grant tells them through a speaker system that they are in the presence of a living prophet and that they are about to witness a miracle. Yeah. And this woman comes out with a blueberry pie. So, and this is another thing. It's like, so the pie was a lie, but then it wasn't a lie. And, the various ways that he lies to them but doesn't lie to them. He also he said there are women present in the house, and that actually turns out to not be a lie. Like, they weren't just alone in a house with him. There were other women in the house, and all of these different things where it just kind of seems like he's psychologically toying with them. And I hate reviewing a movie where I'm just critiquing it for not being the movie I wish it would have been instead. Yeah. And I feel like that's a lot of what we're doing, but that is how I felt about this film. Is I was like, hey, I think this is pretty well constructed and pretty well acted and pretty well executed. I just think that, like, there's a more interesting version of this screenplay. Like, there's, I think there's a lot of opportunities here that don't quite land as, and I think we're in the minority here because this movie is being very well reviewed and very well received. It is. Well, the funny thing about the reviews are they're kind of what you're saying. They love it for all of those things, but of the few that I've read, I've read a few that they're kind of like, it kind of falls apart at the end, but the performance by Hugh Grant was amazing, and the production design, the cinematography was all great. Like that seems to be, but there are, I guess I shouldn't say that, there are a lot of people who really enjoyed this movie. So yeah.
Anyway, this living prophet eats the cake. It turns out the cake is poisoned. He tells them that the pie. She eats the blueberry pie. She dies. He has them check her pulse and make sure she's not breathing. And he tells them she's going to come back to life. They leave the room for a while because, and this is something we didn't talk about. This is one of the things that's also pretty inaccurate to LDS faith. They leave the room because an older member of the church comes to check on them, who looks like he's maybe like their mission president, but it's Topher Grace in this very weird small role, and he's wearing.
Why was he in it?
Yeah, and he's wearing this name tag that says like elder, like something on it. But I'm like, first of all, when older people are on missions, are they called elder or are they called like brother?
No, they're called elder.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Yeah. I was like, is that right? And
but it was weird, because like,
wouldn't
why
he be like with his wife?
Yes.
Wouldn't he be?
That's the thing. I was like,
he
why
wouldn't be by himself?
There's no missionaries that are by themselves. You can serve a mission with your spouse.
Yeah.
You can't, as far as I understand, you can't serve a mission by yourself. So I was like, who is this guy? And like, I mean, for older couples, sometimes you can get away with some stuff, right? But it's he seemed a
little young to be a couple.
To be a senior missionary. Yeah, he was. And also, like, why is Topher Grace in your movie?
Right.
Why? Like, I like Topher Grace. Why
and
don't you use him more?
Right. If he's going to be there, give him something to do. Topher Grace is in this movie literally just to give Hugh Grant a reason to leave the room and the girls to leave the dungeon.
Yes, which this is like, how was this a part of your plan?
Right.
To have this missionary show up at your door at that time.
Right.
And like, I understand, like, yes, he could have done something else, but either way, he had to get them out of that room
at that moment,
back up to the stairs. Yeah. At that moment to make the switcheroo. And also, how did they not hear anything? I mean, she kind of hears something, but it's like, this is kind of where the cracks started to show. And it's like, that's just that's really dumb that was a part of your plan.
Yeah.
And that, because he switches out the bodies.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, we don't find that out right now, but the sister missionaries go back downstairs and Sister Paxton's like, her head is wrong. Like, it wasn't that way. And then they're trying to light these matches to light a fire or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the woman appears right behind Sister Paxton.
Good scare.
Then good scare. Oh yeah.
Good scare.
Great. She throws up like blueberry pie, which, and it puts out the match. And then she says something like, oh, this is,
I could not hear what she was saying.
I couldn't either.
I couldn't tell what she was saying, but it's something about the girls repeat it later. Yeah. That she kind of tells them what she saw when she died, and that's the prophecy that she's delivering to them, is the prophecy of what exists, in the afterlife. Again, all of this, like, he's doing all of this stuff there's all these weird psychological games that he's playing with them, when really the only conclusion he's just bringing them to is like, religion is control. And which is, again, kind of like a pretty boilerplate, like, atheism for beginners conclusion about what, like, religion is the opiate of the masses, religion, this kind of thing. And I'm like, I just was sort of hoping for a grander ultimate truth. I was hoping for maybe something more unexpected, and I just sort of, what winds up ultimately, I mean, we do find out that Hugh Grant's character, at long last, we kind of find out he is homicidal. He slits one of the missionaries' throats. And that's our first moment where it's like, okay, no, he is intent on killing these girls, and he will kill them. And we do this whole moment where he pretends that he believes in simulation theory. And again, I'm like, why?
That was the dumbest part of the movie.
This whole simulation theory misdirect. I'm like,
I didn't get that, and it didn't come back in any way really to kind of like, and this was the part too. So Sister Barnes is challenging him, and she tells Sister Paxton earlier, like, he doesn't do well when you challenge him. So she's challenging him, and she uses the code word magic underwear, because Sister Paxton found a letter opener and they're going to stab him in the neck. and he like, you know, she's challenging him, and just before she says the code word, you know, he slits her throat, and she falls down, and then, you know, Sister Paxton runs up the stairs for some reason. I don't know why she ran up the stairs. I mean, she runs up the stairs, and then she's like, I have to challenge him. And then at this point, she becomes like the world's greatest detective.
Yeah.
And she changes to Sherlock Holmes or Batman, whatever, what have you.
She's all of a sudden just very, very smart, very capable, it's a dramatic shift.
It is. And it goes into the inconsistency of the character. Like, okay, and maybe she was that way all along, but there's a better way to do that. And it was like, she all of a sudden, like, she's like, okay, I got to challenge him. So then she goes down and she challenges him, and she's like, this is what happened. You must have done this. And they do this whole Sherlock Holmes scene where it shows exactly what she did, which he had another woman switch the body when they were up, you know, when the elder came to the door. And it was like, okay, it just feels so weird. It feels like such a strange shift in the tone.
She kind of calls him out. Because he's improvising this bit about simulation theory. He's saying, I found this computer chip in your companion's arm, and this proves that she wasn't real. Because he's doing this thing with fire earlier where like he's looking at how fire reacts to each one of them, which again, like if this is him improvising, then why was he doing the fire thing the whole time? Because he's been doing it kind of the whole time, observing how the fire reacts to each of them. So when this was happening, I was like, oh, is this what it is? Is this real? And then she's like, oh no, you're making this up. You're riffing because things aren't going according to your plan. And you're off script. Like the woman that you replaced the other woman with went off script and said it's not real. And told us that this is all a big farce. And now you're off script and you're riffing. And he's like, well, if I switch the bodies out, there must be another way into this room. And she finds that there's a trap door hidden under the table in the room. And he says, oh, good job. You found the trap door, but don't go down there unless you want to know the one true religion.
The dumb thing is too, right before that, he's like, it's a simulation, and like you should kill yourself to be freed.
Right.
Sorry. And I was like, what's your point there? Like,
again,
what if she kills herself? Like, so what's your end game? Like, I don't get it. What's the point of trying to get her to kill herself? And it just didn't make sense.
It's just him like proving to himself and the slaves that he has in his basement, like, look, I got 2 more people to kill themselves. I killed one of them and the other one killed herself. So our religion is still true. And I think that you're right, that there could have, in a way he is a zealot. He's a zealot for this idea about control, that like, he's like with the right prompts and the right series of with just enough psychological manipulation, I can get people to do anything. And maybe that's his whole point, is he doesn't care if he gets them to walk willingly into their own slaughterhouse where he kills them, or if he gets them to kill themselves, or if he gets them to be a slave in his basement. His whole point is, with the right amount of emotional and psychological manipulation, I can get anyone to do anything. And maybe that's all his point is, but I just wonder, I'm like, it does seem like you're trying to teach these girls something, lead them down a path and reveal some truth to them, only to then have it result in their death. And so
it's like, listen, dude, you can't be doing this all that often. Like, how many missionaries come to your door? Like, this is probably the first set of LDS missionaries that he's had. Like, so you can't be picky when it comes to what you want to do. Because how do you get women to come if you just kill them both? Then it's weird.
What we ultimately find out when she does go down into the, super dungeon, down the cellar door to find the one true religion, is that he does have this hidden room that has, and I thought this was kind of a cool detail, that the room is locked with their bike lock. There's a kind of this fun detail early on in the film where one of the Sister Barnes puts the key to their bike lock in her pocket, and he takes their coats when they first come in, and when they get their coats back, the key has switched to Sister Paxton's coat, and they don't know why that is. And I remember thinking, like, that's a weird detail that he just,
that was a good payoff.
And that's a good payoff that she finds out, oh, you always knew that I was going to be the one to make it to this point, and that I would need the key to unlock it.
Because at least I felt like because she was more naive, right?
Yeah.
And
she was easier to manipulate.
Yeah. But again, going into the inconsistency because now she's not.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, now she's super observant and super smart and super capable. But she gets into this room using the unlocking the bike lock, and it's full of a bunch of women in cages. And so
it's almost like baby cribs.
Yeah, and with your question of how often does this happen? At least often enough to have like 6 or so slaves in cages in his basement. He's at least been able to do this enough times to accrue a little bevy of slaves, and who knows how many times one of them has eaten a poison pie and how many different, we don't know actually how long he's been doing this. But again, you want to talk about inconsistencies in character. This man says to them at the beginning, and it feels so genuine, in their first conversation in the first room, he says, I promise you, I wasn't trying to find the one true religion, but I did find it. And I think that there's something about that where he's like, hey, look, I was just probing and asking questions, and I was just on this pursuit for knowledge and truth. And I accidentally stumbled upon the one thing in the world that is true, that is consistent. And I thought, I thought that seemed so genuine. And then getting to hear, it's like, I don't know, it seems like you really set all this up because you are actually sadistic enough to.
And you are a misogynist.
And like you're saying, like, I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to find the one true church. I just accidentally found it. But it's like, I don't know. It seems like you were trying to build a modality by which you could manipulate and ensnare women. Like that's all this seems like it amounts to.
Well, and this was the weirdest thing too, is because Sister Paxson, he's like, okay, so they meet in the dungeon where all the women are kept. And which I imagine that they are all from different religions.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, well, did you see? And she's like, yes, I saw it. Like they have this weird conversation. She's like, well, the only thing is that the one true religion is control. And when she said that, I was like, what? Like, I'm a pretty observant guy. I especially with movies, I usually can come to a conclusion. I'm sure you are this way as well. Like I can usually see those, but I was like now that I think about it, like, yeah, okay, but how did she come to that conclusion? Like, did you feel this was weird? Because I felt it was like, there's no way I could have gotten to that conclusion.
I don't know that she would have said the exact right word that he wants her to say, but I do get that she was like, he goes, why did I put the bike lock there? And she's like, because you wanted me to know that the only reason the bike lock was there was because you knew that I would find it. Right. And so you wanted me to know that the only reason I'm standing right here is because I did everything you wanted me to do. Yeah. And that I can see how you connect those dots of, the one true religion is I'm not in control of my own, and I think that, I don't know. I think I was hoping, I don't know what payoff I was hoping for. I get I like what you're talking about the possibility of the title being Zealot, and that that he has some other iteration that he believes is I don't know what payoff I was hoping for. But I do track it. It makes sense to me. I get how they get there. I just feel like, okay, so his character is just like an evil guy who just wants to hurt women.
And I get how it was control, but I don't get how she got it. But that's my own, I don't know. And just inconsistency of,
and then anyway, he winds up coming up behind her and telling her how every decision in her life has been made by other people and telling her what to do. And he winds up saying the magic words, magic underwear, and she stabs him in the neck with her letter opener and tries to escape from the house. She can't get out.
Yeah, she goes like in a circle back into the room.
Dungeon, and he shows up and stabs her in the stomach with the box cutter. And then we do this sequence about prayer where he asks her to pray for them, and she lets him know that about the study that was done. And I think this is meant to let us know like that she's aware of all of the arguments against faith, that he wasn't necessarily giving them new information. She's telling him, hey, yeah, they did a study, you know. But again, I kind of feel like, and this is sort of the movie almost saying, she's like, I don't really care if the study proved that prayer heals people or doesn't. I just think praying is nice. And so she prays. He crawls toward her and tries to finish her off with the box cutter. But just before he can, Sister Barnes gets back up and slams a 2x4 with nails sticking out of it that was set up earlier in the film.
Yes, it was set up. Yeah.
And that's a, you know, decent payoff.
And I kind of thought it would be Topher Grace.
Yeah.
Like hoping that he would have a bigger role in the movie, but he didn't. But it was Sister Barnes going into this resurrection theme, you know, which he talks about.
Yeah.
But then Sister Barnes dies right after.
Yeah.
She falls over and she's definitely gone.
But then we have sort of an ambiguous ending here that a lot of people, there's some debate about this, because what she does is she winds up crawling through a vent out of the house, and she crawls out and it snowed all night long and it's very white and there's snow everywhere. And people think that this might mean that Sister Paxton actually died too. And she crawls out of the house and it's like she's climbing into the afterlife. Like she's climbing into heaven, because what happens is she gets out of the house and her cell phone still doesn't have a signal. And then a butterfly lands on her hand, which is what she said. She said, if I died, I would come back as a butterfly and I would land on people's hands so that they knew it was me. And she looks at this butterfly on her hand, and then from another angle, the butterfly's not there. And so the movie's sort of like, is the butterfly Sister Barnes coming to visit her, or is Sister Paxton dead and the butterfly is a symbol and the snow is a symbol that she's in the afterlife, or is she just delirious because she's losing a lot of blood? And I don't mind this ambiguous ending. I wish that the screenplay's ambiguity had been saved for the ambiguity between whatever lesson he was trying to teach them, whatever truth he was trying to show them, and the truth that they believe in. And I wish that there had been some way for the screenplay to arrive in a place that has that being the ambiguity, instead of it just being like, nah, he's just like an evil atheist who wanted to harm women, and we don't know if she escapes with her life or not. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it was, the ambiguity there is kind of, I don't know. I still don't really know how I feel about that. Like, I'm not blown away by it. Like, I was kind of thinking, like, once she got out, I was like, okay, she either died or she's really getting out. And she sees the butterfly and then she doesn't. And I was like, okay, so they're doing this. And I mean, I don't know. I don't, either way, whether or not she's dead, what did she learn? Like ambiguous endings in some ways, I like them sometimes and sometimes I don't. But I'll go to Inception. So in Inception, he spins the top, and then Leonardo DiCaprio, the top is spinning, but he goes and runs and sees his kids. And then we never see if the top falls or not. But that's not the point. The point is that Leonardo DiCaprio has decided that it doesn't matter. He can be with his kids. So that's the point of the top, him not paying attention to the top, is because he doesn't care. And that's why I like that ambiguous ending, because he got something out of it. Right. Like it doesn't matter what happened there. He still is fine. Like he's fine. Yeah. And that's when ambiguous endings work really, really well, is when it you can go either way, but the character kind of got what they wanted. And I don't know if the character really got what they wanted. So I still haven't, I don't know. I don't hate it. Don't love it, but still kind of trying to decide.
Yeah. I'm not really sure like what Sister Paxton has learned by the end of this movie. I'm not sure if she's changed in any way, or if she's just like, boy, atheists are really scary people. Like, I don't know, or if her faith is just that much more, firmed up. And it's interesting. Like the movie that we talked about last week here, we talked about how that movie felt like a play. I also feel like this movie the structure of this film could have made a really interesting premise for a play. I think this could be a really interesting play. I think that the setup of the story, the container for the story, two LDS missionaries who are soaked by the rain outside go into a strange man's home because he seems very inviting and charming, and he promises them that his wife's inside, and they wind up having this very kind of like twisted game of cat and mouse. I think it's a great premise, a great setup. I think it could work really well as a stage play. I found the journey to be very engrossing, and I really enjoyed watching this movie. I was very entertained. I just felt like the third act sort of landed in a place that felt a little too kind of like predictable maybe for me, or
well, I feel very much the same way. It felt very much like, this is where you're going. Like, oh, okay, I thought it was going to be different, or it just kind of turned into something that was very interesting and very intriguing to watch. And then it just turned into, okay, he's a total jerk who just likes to control people.
Right.
And I really wish it would have been something else. Like, his character was so interesting at the beginning. And even though Hugh Grant did amazing the whole movie, in the end, his character is just he's not likable in any way.
Right.
I don't root for him in any way.
He went from being a very interesting villain who makes some really good, interesting arguments, who's very charming, to just being an evil guy.
Yeah.
And
and I think that's a perfect way to sum it up. It's just, he's just evil.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, okay, well, that's one dimensional. Like that. I wish it would have been more. I wish he would have been more.
I wish we could have seen more of an insight into why he is the way he is. Like, what is it about what he believes that makes him so sadistic? Is there something about, and that's what, as an atheist, I go like, is it just that he doesn't have a faith in a traditional conception of like an anthropomorphic God, and because of that he wants to kill people? And I don't, that falls weak for me. But let's get into our scores here. Let's break it down. We do scores for a technical rating, just on how the technical construction and craft of the film. We do a score for the ending, how well did they stick the landing of the film. For rewatchability, how likely are you to rewatch this film, and how much do you think you would get out of a rewatch. For cultural impact and relevance, and our subjective score. So what's your technical score for A24's Heretic?
My technical score is a 7. It could possibly be more, but it comes down to the screenplay just being kind of like, well, it's kind of went down, but everything else, like Hugh Grant is amazing. The sister missionaries, the two women who play them also were former members of the church, former members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was interesting. I think that added something interesting. I'm sure that they have they were able to get something out of that. I think they both did really well. Sister Barnes, I think she's a really good actress.
Yeah.
Both of them. But anyway, the acting was great.
You know that they were both raised LDS, right?
Well, that's what I was saying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So they were in real life. I'm sorry. They were raised as members of the church.
I literally tuned out for 2 seconds and I missed you saying that. So I just missed that one.
No worries. So that was...
I just repeat it back. You know the thing you just said? You know that the thing you just said is a thing?
Yeah. No, that was totally fine. But anyway, that added something interesting to their characters. I think they brought some there was some, genuineness. How do you say that? Genuine sincerity, to their performance. And I like their performance. I think they both did really well.
Authenticity.
Thank you. That's the word I'm thinking of. Authenticity. And the cinematography was great. The sound was done really well. I think everything was done really well. It was just kind of like how it descended into the movie that we got. I think 7 is appropriate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The conversation we had makes it sound like we really didn't like this movie. And I'm like, I liked a lot of aspects of this movie, but I agree. Like, they even have Dante's Inferno on the wall, and I'm thinking, if we're kind of gonna try to do this like 7 layers of hell descent, we get 3 rooms and a super dungeon. I'm like, let's go 7 layers of hell. If he's going to be the devil, let's actually have him be the devil and have him be putting them through some kind of real test instead of just sort of like toying with them. But my technical score was also high. It was 7.5 because I really like the cinematography. I really enjoyed watching this movie, and I think that that's due to the fact that it is well made and well constructed at the technical level. So I wasn't sitting here watching the movie going like, geez, like I wasn't, rolling my eyes at the screenplay or at the acting while I was watching it. It wasn't until later that I sat with it that I was like, man, I feel like there's a much better movie in there, specifically in how you progress. Because the first couple acts, I'm really like intrigued.
Oh, me too.
It's kind of once they go down into that basement that I'm like, the movie starts to kind of fall apart for the back and doesn't land as well. So that takes us to our ending score, which my ending score is 6. And it's because I think it's the part of the movie that sort of makes the movie frustrating for me. I still think that this ending, I can track the logic of it. And that's why, it definitely like is a way to tie up the screenplay. I don't think it's like completely left field or anything. It's just not the ending I wanted something that hits a little harder, that maybe asks more interesting questions. And
you know, I gave it a 5 because I feel the exact same way. I wish it would ask more interesting questions or lead to something more than just he's crazy. He's a crazy guy who's kind of a control freak. So
yeah, I think that it sort of lets the viewer off the hook by being like, don't worry about anything that guy was saying. He's crazy. And it's like, well, I think that we could have something that maybe, that challenges the audience a little bit more. Rewatchability. I gave this movie a 6 as well. Well, maybe I'll give it a 7. I don't know. I think it was entertaining. And I think that it's a dense enough conversation that they're having, particularly in the first couple acts, that I think that there could be a lot revealed on a rewatch, that maybe it's like, oh, I didn't notice that. Or, so
I gave it a 6.5. I mean, I don't think I want to rewatch this movie, but I can see, I'm sure there are people who would love to see it, but it was Hugh Grant for sure. Like in the first 2 acts, like, wow, he's really interesting, fun to watch him and fun to see. And you probably could pick up on some more on another rewatch. So
cultural significance. What'd you give that?
There's a lot of talk about this movie, and I think it is, I mean, we still have to wait, but as it is right now, I gave it a 7.5. A lot of people are talking about it. It's done pretty well at the box office for what it is. A lot of conversation online, so 7.5.
Yeah, definitely. In that same way that like I said, Barbie was feminism for like feminism 101, feminism for beginners. I think that I take for granted that these are topics that not everybody has had these conversations. Right. And so for a lot of people, this is this is their introduction to this material. And I think that I imagine, like, what would I have thought of this film if I had seen it as like a 16-year-old, or like, if I think that it would have like really like blown my mind a lot more or like me at like 18, like a freshman in college, it would have like a very formative time. This would have been like really, and I think that maybe I'm just not the target audience to really have my mind blown by it, but I can see the ripples that it's making in the culture, and how, from not just the LDS perspective, but from a secular perspective and from perspectives of other faiths, it definitely is a movie that inspires conversation. So
it is for sure.
Yeah. So I gave it a 6. Maybe I could go a little higher, but what's your subjective score?
My subjective score is my subjective score is a 5.5. That's what I gave it, because there are a lot of good things the first 2 acts, but then it kind of goes off the rail. I'm deciding either 5.5 or a 5. What did you give it?
I gave it a 6. So we're right around the same place, but probably for the same reasons you did, where like I can give the movie a lot of credit for the things that we've given it credit for. The construction, there's a lot technically going on that I really vibe with. Cinematography, everyone's doing good work. Interesting conversation. Definitely, we had an interesting conversation here. I just don't know that I'm the target audience for. I think me 10 or 12 years ago would have really dug this movie. Right. And I'm not sure that I'm currently like the best target audience member for this film, even though you would think that you and I would be the perfect audience for this movie. It just seems like we're both craving a conversation in the screenplay that gets a little deeper. We're like, I know all that stuff. Now take me in the third act, take me in, take me somewhere I haven't been yet. And the movie doesn't really do that. And that's fine. That's not necessarily the movie's fault. That's more just like me not being
it's yeah, that's it, I guess. I'll stick with
Yeah.
5.5. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's Heretic. If you are an atheist or an LDS person or just a Christian person or a person
Any
of
religion, yeah.
any religion, and you've seen Heretic, let us know your thoughts. Let us know your takes.
Yeah. What did you? Yeah. The good thing is you can ask either of us questions about both sides of the of the scale or whatever, whether you want a secular perspective or a religious perspective. And I'm not a spokesman for the church, so it's not like I'm always right. But
I
I'm
am an
happy to answer.
official spokesperson for atheism. They've deemed
Okay,
me
that's good.
the spokesperson.
King
So
atheist.
I do. I know all the things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have like a torture maze that I put people through about it. It's pretty cool.
Just so you know, that's not what I feel like atheists are. I'm sure some people do, but that's not how I feel. And that's not my experience. But yeah.
No, yeah, I know. Yeah, we got through it. That was good. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you at the next one. Till then, go keep on keeping on.
Keep on trucking.
Yeah.
And don't lure people into your dungeons.
Yeah. All right. Okay. We'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.